Hey there, this is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. In this video, I want to share with you my technique to layering synths and getting a nice, lush, big sound out of your synth performances. Now, typically when I layer synths, I tend to think of them and break them down into different sections of the frequency spectrum. So I'm going to be using a basic 2-oscillator synth in Ableton Live. It's called Analog, but you can follow along with any synth that you might have in any DAW that you're using. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So I'm going to start by dragging the analog over to my MIDI channel. And let's go ahead and hear some of the chords that I've already recorded. Not too exciting, but let's go ahead and break this down. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to start at the bottom end of the spectrum so that we're covering the low end and the sub, and then work our way to the higher end of the spectrum. So what I'm going to do is rename this sub, and I will duplicate this, and we're going to go into the MIDI, and we're just going to deactivate the notes that are the other notes in the chord and just have the bottom notes of that chord structure so that we can leave them for the bottom end of the sub. So we'll go ahead and call this a sub. And now let's go into our analog. Now, immediately what we're going to do is just focus in on the one oscillator. And you could use any synth that you're using to follow along. So we're only using one oscillator for the sub. Now that helps us to narrow down to which waveform we're going to be using to get the best sounding sub. And typically you want to go with a sine wave for that. And let's just lower the octave. Go 1, 2. And I definitely encourage you to use headphones or studio monitors so you can hear the low end being represented here. And that's pretty much it for the sub. We're going to make sure that we set the voices of the synthesizer, the polyphony, to mono. And that way, there isn't any overlapping from one note to the next. And that's pretty basic, straightforward. Next, let's head over to a bass patch. Maybe just layering the same information, that the same notes and pattern the sub is playing, but in this case just something that can kind of cut through in the mix a little bit and we can hear the bass line. So let's duplicate the sub and rename that to bass. Now it still has the same instrument that we started off with the sub, so let's go ahead and change the waveform from sine to saw. Now you can do you can implement enabling the second oscillator, so we can do a little bit of detuning here and get somewhat of a nice thicker sound out of this synth. So I'm going to leave that second oscillator was set to 0 octaves, or we'll leave it that way. I kind of actually liked the way that sounded. And what we're going to focus in is a little bit of effect processing, and we're going to implement some EQ, because what we're going to do is we're going to basically shave off little by little each part of the frequency spectrum here. And this is a great helpful way to do that by just using a simple EQ after each of the layers of that we're adding. So let's just trim away some of that high end. And we're going to be using a utility or any plugin that you might have in your DAW that allows you to change the stereo width. And we'll set this to mono so that this is also lined in the mix within the mono signal. All right. And we can also make some room for the sub. So we'll take a little bit of that low end and let the sub live down there. And we can open this up as much as you like. This is all going to be personal preference from here. But that'll handle our bass. Now let's head over to the chords and rename this chords. Turn this on. Now, spending some time and focusing our attention on the chords here. let's go ahead and implement some detuning. Now, detuning is just basically going to detune or move the pitch of the tone that you have in your synthesizer slightly depending on which direction you're detuning it. So I'm going to leave it at sawtooth, and we're going to leave the octave up here, just normal, the way it is, the way it was played. And let's just slightly detune and see what we get when we do that. And you see how it's changed the characteristics of the tone. It's made it a little bit wider. So I like that. That's what we're aiming for. Okay, that's cool. And that's using just 2 oscillators with a sawtooth on each one. And now we're going to head over to a specific unique section in your synthesizer, and that is the unison. Now, unison does like a global detuning. If we just detuned one oscillator against the other, well, that's detuning one tone or one pitch against another pitch. But detuning will slightly detune everything. So let's just use that. And it works in conjunction with the amount of voices or polyphony, meaning the amount of notes you can play at the same time. So it works in conjunction with that. So right now we have 8 voices and the unison is set to 2 for maybe the synth that you're using, whether it's Serum or Massive, you might have the option to go to 1 or 4, but right now we're going to stay with the basic that we have offered here. So I'll stay with 2 and we're going to slightly detune it. Detuning does a nice job in widening it and smearing and creating that nice open sound with the synth. So once we've done a little detuning, let's go back to that first oscillator. And I'm going to enable the elephone. I just want a little bit of movement. I don't want the synth to be stiff. So by enabling the elephone, we're causing this low frequency oscillator to add just some movement. So, you know, it's just not, like I said before, not just stiff, but it becomes a little cold that way as well. So over here, I'm going to assign just a little bit of that LFO. I'm going to hold the command button and route a little bit of that and change the rate. All right, and you can even, let's see what it sounds like with having one oscillator an octave down. It's cool, having that one octave down and one up adds a really nice depth to it. So let's go ahead and add an EQ after that. And like I said, we're gonna trim a little bit off the low end so the sub lives there. And let's see if we can just take a little bit off of here. And let's duplicate this. And now we've got chord 2. So let's immediately open up a little more of that. And let's work our way up in the frequency spectrum here. Now what we're going to do is open up the octave here and add a little bit more detuning and see where that gets us. Well, next let's add another layer, and we start to inch a little bit more towards the right of the frequency spectrum, and we're going to open it up and bring a lot more of the highs and a little more effects processing to make it really a lot more fuller. So let's go ahead and duplicate our last state, chords 2, and here we have, let's just solo this one. So let's open this up a little more. Now what we can do here is these oscillators on the analog have a sub-sync oscillator, and we're going to increase the volume in that. And that's going to do is add another sub-oscillator underneath this. And that gives a nice little texture to it as well. Let's go to the unison section and play around with that and see what we get. Okay, and now we can add maybe some chorus to this, maybe to the after the reverb. And we can send it farther back in the mix. Let's play with everybody else by dialing the dry and wet knob on the reverb. Let's just bring a little bit more of that. And lowering the decay time. And next, we're going to go ahead and create another channel, but this time we're simply just going to allow white noise to be played. So here we'll open up the spectrum fully and go to the analog here. And the first oscillator will change from a sawtooth to this the random one here, which will create the white noise. And take the unison off. And the cool thing with having the EQ on each one of these tracks is that you can dial back more of that white noise. See how bright you want to have it. And I'll go ahead and call that track noise. And now let's see how everything sounds together. So next, let's glue it all together. Let's glue all the layers together by just grouping them and adding some effects processing. So we get a nice tight sound. So grab all the tracks. Let's go ahead and group them. And now we have them all in one group. So let's go ahead and start with just a little bit of compression. I'm using the stock compressor from Ableton, and I'm going to lower the threshold. And so I'm going to lower the attack just a little bit, just to trim, just to smooth out any of the initial punch from the synths. And we're going to raise the release a little bit because I want it to sustain a little bit more. I want the release of the compression to kind of hug the sound a little bit more. And the ratio, just think of the ratio as the strength. How strong will it compress when it does pass that threshold? So let's strengthen up the compressor a little bit. And then I'll add some multi-band dynamic compression. The cool thing about this compressor is that you can compress by frequency. And I'm using the OTT preset here. And what's cool about this is that the way this preset is set really does help accentuate the frequencies really well. Now you notice with the OTT compressor, we now hear a lot of that reverb tail going on, which is kind of cool. And so we've got a little bit of compression just to kind of tighten it up, the OTT multi-band compressor to accentuate specific frequencies and bring them out a little bit more and bring out more of the attack and punch of those frequencies out. And then I'll do a little bit of saturation just to give it a little bit more bite. So we'll increase the drive, maybe about 4, and lower it about 2. And some EQing after that. Now the EQ comes into big play, especially when you're trimming this into the mix, when you're having it to fit well in the mix. So you can accentuate which part of that spectrum that's represented, if you want more of the low end or the low mid. So we'll leave that there. And what I'll do is I'll add a little bit of reverb, just a little bit. And this will help kind of glue it all together as well. Just a little bit of the stock reverb here. And lower the decay time. Now, if you don't want any of that tail that you hear after the notes, then you simply just go into each of the layers that do have reverb and just lower them down or take them off or shorten the decay. So that's all up to you, personal preference. And the last thing I would typically do is maybe add a compressor after the reverb to set it to sidechain so that every time the kick will hit, it will have the synths just duck out of the way. So let's go over here, enable the sidechain, and move over to drums and just click the kick. That's what we're going to be using. And let's make it a little drastic to see what it does. Now Now, I hope this video was helpful for you, and as my thank you for watching, I'd love to send you a free sample pack that I've created from some of my projects over the past year. Now, the sample pack is including construction kits filled with loops, different sounds that can really help you get inspired right away. The best part is it's absolutely free and royalty free too, so you can use it in your current projects. I've also included some one-shots, some kicks, snare, percussions, and some transition effects. So this is yours absolutely free. Just go ahead and click the link below in the description box, or you can visit www.beatacademy.com/pack. Yours absolutely free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.